Steven Spielberg doesn't shout. He doesn't slam his fist on the table. He simply looks, decides. And once he chooses, destiny changes forever. For over 5 decades, Spielberg hasn't just directed movies. He has redefined the emotional language of cinema itself. From wars that felt too real, to adventures that made us believe in magic again. His films have shaped how entire generations dream, but behind every masterpiece, there's a secret power few people ever notice. It's not just the camera, not just the music. It's the actors, the chosen ones, who carried his vision on their shoulders. Spielberg doesn't just cast talent. He casts gravity. He searches for the one voice, the one presence, the one performance that turns a script into a myth. And when he finds that person, he never lets them go. These are the actors who didn't just appear in his films. They became part of his soul. Some names you'll expect, others will leave you stunned. But each one reveals the way Spielberg builds legacy from trust, silence, and unshakable instinct. Because in Spielberg's world, acting isn't performance. It's immortality. Some directors find actors. Spielberg found a mirror. Tom Hanks wasn't just another star. He became part of Spielberg's very DNA. Their connection is so deep that when Spielberg calls, Hanks doesn't even ask what the project is. He simply says, yes. No questions, no hesitation, total trust. Think about that. In Hollywood, where ego runs everything, here was an actor who buried his pride and gave himself completely to the vision of one man. And Spielberg rewarded him with roles that would test the soul of any performer. Saving Private Ryan, Catch Me If You Can, Bridge of Spies, The Post. On the battlefield of Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg barely gave him notes. Sometimes just a glance, a whisper. And Hanks still delivered scenes so raw that audiences left theaters in tears. This wasn't just acting. It was living inside the moment, bleeding honesty with every breath. Spielberg once said, "Tom gives me gravity. He keeps the chaos steady." Other actors brought fire, brought noise, but Hanks brought something rarer, silence, that spoke louder than explosions. Their bond isn't flashy. It's not built on red carpets or headlines. It's built on an invisible rhythm, 2 men locked in the same heartbeat. And that's why for over 25 years, Spielberg has returned to him again and again. Because when the world falls into chaos, Hanks is the anchor. The man who makes you believe the impossible is human. If Tom Hanks was Spielberg's anchor, Daniel Day-Lewis was his miracle. When Spielberg cast him as Abraham Lincoln, it wasn't just acting, it was time travel. Day-Lewis didn't audition. He didn't rehearse the way others did. By the time he stepped on set, Lincoln was already standing there. The voice, the walk, even the pauses between words. It was as if history itself had been resurrected. Spielberg later admitted, "There were moments I forgot we were making a movie." And here's what's truly shocking. Spielberg, the man who controls every frame, every beat, every breath of his films, stepped back. He gave away control. He called Day-Lewis not by his first name, but Mr. President, on and off set. Not as a stunt, but because he believed. This was one of the only times Spielberg didn't feel like a director. He felt like a witness. Day-Lewis turned Lincoln into more than a movie. He turned it into a living, breathing memory. And for Spielberg, that was terrifying and beautiful. Day-Lewis never returned to Spielberg's orbit. One film, one role, one unforgettable moment. But sometimes lightning only strikes once, and it burns itself into eternity. There are movie stars, and then there is a force of nature. Harrison Ford wasn't just cast by Spielberg. He became the compass of an entire generation. When Spielberg looked at him, he didn't just see Han Solo. He saw something deeper, a rugged myth waiting to be written. And that myth had a name: Indiana Jones. The hat, the whip, the smirk. But what made Ford different wasn't the costume. It was the way he made chaos feel human. Ford didn't just run through explosions. He bled, he stumbled, he got back up. And that made audiences believe every punch, every fall, every narrow escape. This wasn't a superhero. This was a man who could break and still keep fighting. Spielberg once said, "Harrison brings confidence into a room. And when the camera rolls, that confidence becomes legend." On the set of The Last Crusade, Ford insisted on doing his own stunts. No doubles, no safety net. He told Spielberg, "If I get hurt, you'll know it was worth it." That's who Harrison Ford was. Fearless, relentless, unstoppable. He didn't need to steal the frame. He was the frame. And that's why, decades later, Spielberg still says, if he ever makes another adventure, there's only one man he would call. Because Indiana Jones wasn't just a character. He was a heartbeat, and Harrison Ford carried it like no one else ever could. After Titanic, the world thought Leonardo DiCaprio was just a heartthrob, a pretty face, a boy who made millions scream. But Spielberg saw something else, something sharper. When he cast DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can, he didn't see a star. He saw a scalpel. Precise, surgical, controlled. Every line cut clean, every glance carried weight. This was not the teenage idol the tabloids chased. This was a broken young man hiding behind a perfect suit. Spielberg said DiCaprio had a clock inside him. He never missed a beat, never guessed, never fumbled. Every moment landed exactly where it needed to. That's what stunned Spielberg. Not charm, not fame, control. And the result? DiCaprio wasn't just reinvented. He was revealed. The world finally saw what Spielberg saw all along. Not a boy, but a man, capable of carrying silence, chaos, and desperation in his eyes all at once. There were whispers afterward, more projects, bigger roles, a Howard Hughes epic, a courtroom drama. But the stars never aligned. Still, Spielberg kept praising him. He once called Leo's performance in The Revenant devastating. One film. That's all they needed. Because in that single collaboration, DiCaprio proved even legends can be surprised. And Spielberg never forgot it. For nearly 40 years, Spielberg waited. He had worked with legends, built icons, reshaped cinema itself. But there was one actress he had never touched, one name that stood above all the rest, Meryl Streep. When they finally came together in the post, it wasn't just casting. It was destiny arriving late, but perfectly on time. Spielberg once said, "Directing Meryl is like conducting a symphony with only one instrument." Every note she played mattered. Every glance, every pause, every breath. She didn't need to dominate the room. She dissolved into it. She became Katharine Graham with such quiet power that Spielberg admitted he was nervous directing her. Think about that. The man who controlled Jaws, E.T., and Jurassic Park, shaken by a single performance. What Streep brought wasn't volume. It wasn't fireworks. It was restraint, precision, the kind of control that turns silence into thunder. And Spielberg, who had spent a lifetime shaping chaos, stepped back and let her shape the frame. She earned another Oscar nomination, her 21st. But the real story wasn't the award. It was how Spielberg spoke about her afterward. He didn't just call her great. He called her essential, not just to his film, but to cinema itself. One film, one role, one eternal impression. Because when Meryl Streep finally entered Spielberg's world, the orchestra played its loudest note in perfect silence. Robin Williams wasn't just an actor to Spielberg, he was a lifeline. When they worked together on Hook, the production was a nightmare. The set was too big, the schedule too long, the pressure unbearable. Spielberg, the man who thrived on control, felt himself drowning. And then came Robin. Every night, after the cameras stopped rolling, Robin would pick up the phone and call Spielberg. Not to talk about the film, but to make him laugh. 15 minutes of pure improv, voices, characters, madness. He didn't do it for credit. He didn't do it for attention. He did it because Spielberg needed it. Robin wasn't saving the movie. He was saving the director. On screen, his Peter Pan carried something no one expected. An ache. A sadness. The weight of growing old. This wasn't just a fairy tale. It was a reminder that time steals everything. Except memory. Robin turned fantasy into something painfully human. And years later, when Robin was gone, Spielberg admitted the truth. He delayed Schindler's List because the grief was too heavy. He said, when Robin left, the room just dimmed. That's who Robin Williams was. A lightning bolt, explosive, unpredictable, impossible to contain. But also a flicker of light in someone's darkest night. Spielberg worked with hundreds of actors, but only one made him laugh when he wanted to cry. Only one gave him the courage to finish when he wanted to quit. And that's why, when Spielberg speaks of Robin, his voice cracks. Because Robin didn't just play Peter Pan. He became the magic Spielberg himself almost lost. Steven Spielberg never chased headlines. He never cared about the hottest name or the biggest paycheck. What he searched for was something far rarer: gravity, the kind of presence that doesn't just perform, but reshapes the air around it. Tom Hanks gave him unshakable trust, the quiet force that steadied chaos. Daniel Day-Lewis gave him transformation, a living ghost of history itself. Harrison Ford gave him adventure, the myth made flesh, bruised but unbreakable. Leonardo DiCaprio gave him precision, every beat, every glance sharpened like a blade. Meryl Streep gave him elegance, a symphony of restraint, silence turned into thunder, and Robin gave him life. He gave him joy in the middle of despair. Lightning in a storm Spielberg almost couldn't survive. 6 actors, 6 legacies. Each one left a fingerprint not only on film history, but on Spielberg's very soul. They weren't just characters. They were anchors of memory, fragments of immortality carved into the heart of cinema. Because in Spielberg's world, fame fades, ego collapses, but truth stays. A single performance can outlive the actor, outlive the director, even outlive the film itself. That is the power Spielberg has always protected. And now the question is yours. Which of these legends do you believe defines Spielberg the most? The anchor, the miracle, the compass, the scalpel, the symphony, or the lightning bolt?